This is Speaking of Writers. I'm Steve Richards. The name of the book is The Dead and the Bizarre Are Here and All Around Us. The author is David A. Landry. David, welcome to this program.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Steve.
So, David, when and where were you born?
I was born in 1956 in Lowell, Massachusetts. It's about 35 miles north of Boston.
So, how old were you when you first started having experienced paranormal events?
I probably was around 7 years old.
And do you remember what the first event was?
Oh, yeah. The first event was a moving chair. My sister and I shared the bedroom, and, there were 5 of us in the house, and we only had 3 bedrooms. And she slept on one side of the room, and I slept on the other. Well, we have a habit of getting up early in the morning and sneaking by my mother's and father's bed and going into the kitchen and getting snacks out of the cabinets and then going back into the bedroom and just enjoying them. And then one day I was just waking up and I was hearing some type of movement going on in the kitchen. So I'm saying, oh, I wonder who's up. So I looked into my father's and mother's bedroom, which was right next to ours, and they were sleeping. And my sister Doreen, she was sleeping as well in our room. And then around the other side of the room, there's another bedroom where my sister Gail and Julie had slept. And I'm saying, well, who else is in the house here? So I did a low crawl by my father's bed to go into the kitchen to see what was going on in the kitchen. Now, I have a rope. I used to watch The Rifleman. And I had a rope that was made out like a lasso. And I used to lasso the doorknobs and anything that I could lasso in the house. And I got pretty good at it. So I went into the kitchen with the rope, and I seen this chair. It was moving around by itself in the kitchen, It looked like somebody was just pulling it and moving it. It was on its edges of the one leg out of the 4 legs. And I had little handles up on top of the corners of the chair. So, not thinking of, ghosts and spirits and all that, or who's moving the chair. I'm just playing along with it, and I started lassoing the chair. And then I jumped on it. And as I jumped on it, it moved a little bit more with my weight on it, and then it stopped. My father came into the kitchen, and he's going, "What are you doing in here?" I said, "Well, Dad, the chair was moving around by itself, and I jumped on it, and it stopped." And my father looked at me, and he goes, "How did you get out of the bedroom?" And I said, "Well, I just heard the noises of the chair, and noises coming out of the kitchen." He says, "Get back into bed right now." And my sister Julie, she came out, and she's the oldest of the family as far as siblings, and she started laughing. And my father said, "Get back in the room. I want to see you back out of that room." And I said, "Okay." So I went back in the room, and that was my first experience with moving furniture.
We're chatting with David Landry here on Speaking of Writers. The book is The Dead and the Bizarre Are Here and All Around Us. You've had an interesting life. You started life as a Marine for 16 years, joined the Army National Guard in California, worked government contracts overseas for 9 years, worked for the Department of Defense as well as a federal police officer?
Yes, I liked change.
Did you always want to become a writer?
My family, after telling them some of my stories and some of my friends, they all come out and say, "You should write a book." Then I went on a podcast, a police group people, and even the sponsor of the podcast come out and said, "You got an interesting life. You should start writing some books." And I started thinking about it. And then one day during the pandemic, you get bored and sitting in the house and not able to go anywhere. I just sat down and I said, I'll try it off. I'll write a couple of stories and see how it goes. And the next thing you know it, 4 books later.
4 books later, David, and you can't stop writing.
I'm on a break right now. I do have a couple of books in the works that I've already started. I'm probably midway on both of them.
All right, you mentioned in your book about Mr. Black, a.k.a. the Hat Man. Could you tell us a little bit about who this being is or what he is and the Police Academy dorm visitor?
One night, and I believe it wasn't too long after the chair incident, We were still in the same apartment at that time. I was laying in bed. I don't know what time it was. I'd probably say I was about 7 years old then. The door was halfway open, and there was just a little bit of light coming in through that door from the living room where my father and mother were sitting watching TV. In that corner in the back of the door, I seen this figure come walking out. And it started coming towards me, and I'm laying in bed, and I'm going, it's got to be Pepe, which is my grandfather. It's got to be Pepe. Nobody else is in here but him. It's got to be him. And he had his hat on his head. So he kept walking towards me very slowly. And then he got to the point where he was just over my face about 8 inches, looking down at me. And I'm like, I can't move. I'm frozen. They call it, later on in life, I found out it was called sleep paralysis. And I couldn't move. I just stared at him. And next thing you know what, I felt pressure around my throat. And I felt this Mr. Black choking me. And I was able to move my hands up to my throat, and I couldn't feel any hands from Mr. Black on me. So I said to myself, well, the only way I'm going to survive this, at that age, thinking that, because I'm watching a lot of movies, you play dead and, they'll walk away. So I did. I played off. I was dead. And then I felt the pressure release from my throat. And Mr. Black had stood up and just stayed there for about 5 seconds, looked at me, and then turned around and started walking slowly back to the corner where he just came out of. He stopped midway, and he looked over to my sister, and now I'm thinking, okay, he just got done choking me. He's going to go over to her. But he didn't. He turned around and looked back at me to see if I moved, and I didn't. And he went back into the corner where he came out of. Now, I screamed. Oh, my God, I can still see it today. I screamed my living life out of me. And my sister, Doreen, she jumped up, and she started screaming. She didn't know why I was screaming, but she started screaming. So my father and mother come into the bedroom, and they turn the light on, and my father looked at me, and he goes, what are you guys doing? I said, Mr. Black come out from behind that door over there. And he goes, who? I said, Mr. Black. He goes, who's Mr. Black? I said, well, he had a hat on his head, and he come up to me, and he choked me. And then he went back into the corner over there, and he didn't come back out. And then you came in. So my father goes, you guys need to stop playing around and go back to sleep. So after he walked out of the room, I asked my mother, can you leave the door open? Because I didn't want that space back there again. And she says, yeah, I'll leave it open and go back to sleep. So she went into the living room with my father to continue watching whatever they were watching on TV. And I said to Doreen, I said, Mr. Black, I was going to get you. And she started crying again. And she goes, stop it. Stop. I said, no, he was going to get you. And then he went back to the door. So my mother and father was hearing my sister crying, and he turned around and he says, hey, stop playing. So I said, okay. So me and Doreen took turns staying awake, and if he were to come out again from that corner, we would want each other. Well, he didn't. But the next day, we finally fell asleep. The next day, my mother come into the room. She turned the light on and to get us up for school, and she looked at my throat, and she screamed. My father come running into the room. He goes, what's the matter? He goes, look at his throat. So he looked at it and he goes, no way. And he put his hand up against my throat, and there were like bigger hands to my father. And my father goes, I didn't do this, to my mother. And she goes, I know. And he took my sister Doreen's hands and put up against the throat, just to eliminate the ideas of her doing it. And, of course, her hands were smaller. So my father turned around and he looked at me and he looked at my mother, and he goes, we can't send him to school like this. Because you don't know what the school will say, and abuse in the house and all that stuff. And my mother goes, no, well, you're not going to send him to school. So she kept putting that foundation onto my throat maybe to cover it up, but it kept washing off onto the shirt and all. So I was out of school, I believe, either a week or two, because the bruises got deeper in color as they got older. And that was my first and only experience with him. But to add to that, later on in life, I was telling some friends in the police department, some of my stories, and I mentioned about Mr. Black, and find out that millions of people around the world, and I'm saying millions, experienced this same experience that I had. And most of the people were children at that time, and it comes out early in the mornings, like around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, their experiences. But he's not known as Mr. Black. He's Mr. Black to me, but in life itself, he's known as the Hat Man. So if your listeners would like to know or have ever had an experience like that, you can find him on the internet. There's also YouTube videos of the Hat Man.
We're chatting with David Landry. His book is The Dead and the Bizarre Are Here and All Around Us. Have your family members asked you why you're telling this now in your books and not in person?
In the beginning, they were, interested in it. And, of course, like everybody else, it's hard to believe, because back then we never talked about ghosts. We never talked about spirits or anything like that because nobody talked about it. It never happened until later on when more things started coming about in the house. No, they haven't. And there's reasons why I've never said anything till now, recently, till we started writing books.
Tell me about the thermostat and who was turning it on.
Oh, that's a good one. That was a family joke there. We'd be sitting down in the living room, and it'd be about 85 outside. One day we were sitting down, and we heard the heater going on. And my father looked at me and my sisters and said, "Hey, who's turned on the thermostat? It's too hot in here to put heat on." And everybody would say, "Well, I didn't turn it on. And this went on for, oh, my goodness, I want to say about a year. And we'd be just sitting down there and just hear the heater be turned on. And then nobody would own up to it. Even as of today, nobody would own up to it. And so then one day, my father was sitting down. His back was towards the thermostat. When you turn the thermostat on, you will hear a clicking. And my father was sitting, and all of a sudden he heard a click. And he turned around and looked back, and nobody was in the room except for him. And as he was sitting down and continuing on what he was doing, then he heard the heater go on. And then my father said, "Oh, okay, I see what's happening here," and realized that, we have an entity that followed us from the old apartment to the new house that we moved in. And then from there, we never seen the thermostat go back on after that day.
What about the second heartbeat, David, and where did that happen?
That happened in the new home that we moved into. And my father, he likes taking showers with the door open, get fresh air. And everybody respected that. And, they stayed in the living room. We watched TV and all while he was in his shower with the door open. And then my father came out of the bathroom a lot faster than normal. My mother went into the kitchen. I heard her talking to him. And she went into the kitchen and she said, "Hey," she goes, "you're out of the shower kind of quick." He goes, "You won't believe what I just heard in that bathroom." And my mother goes, "What?" He says, "I'm laying in the tub and I can hear this heartbeat." And he says, "It was somewhat loud." But I put my hand up against my chest and my heartbeat was different than the heartbeat that I was hearing. So my mother said to him, she goes, "Well, no, maybe it was yours." He says, "No." He says, "I know." He says, "No, it wasn't mine." So she said, "Oh, okay." So I went into the kitchen and I started talking to my father. I said, "Dad, did you say you heard a heartbeat in the bathroom?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "How did you know?" I said, "I heard you tell Mom that." He said, "You listening to our conversation?" I go, "No, I just happened to hear you talking to her about it." And at that time, I started getting into paranormal activity stuff with my sister Julie. He turned around and he goes, "No, I'm not exaggerating." He says, "You know what we've been going through." He said that to me privately. He goes, "You know what we've been going through since we left the apartment." He says, "You believe me?" I goes, "Yeah, I do." So one day, went down the cellar, and things were happening down the cellar, and then I went over to one of the walls in the corner, and there was these little rocks that had fallen out of the wall, and I looked over, and inside one of the walls was little coin boxes. So I grabbed the coin boxes, and I went upstairs, and I said, "Hey, Dad," I said, "look at this. Look what I found down the cellar." He goes, "Well, where?" I said, "In the wall." So me and him spent the whole day down there just touching everything on the walls to see if maybe we could find more money. And we didn't. So he says, "Well, the right thing to do is to call the owners that lived here and then let them know that we found their belongings here and we'll give it back to them." I said, "Okay." So I did. I called them up and I said to the owner, I said, "You know that your husband had left money here in the house?" And she says, "What money?" I said, "These coins." And she says, "Oh, he passed away some years before you guys moved in." She goes, "You can keep those coins." She goes, "Oh, I don't need them." And I just I don't know why, but I asked her. I said, "Well, where did he pass away?" She goes, "Well, he had a heart attack in the bathtub and died in the bathroom." I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah." And I didn't tell her that my father heard it. But then when my father came home, he had asked me, he said, "Did you get in touch with the owners?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You won't believe what they just told me." He goes, "What?" I says, "Mr. So-and-so had passed away, Dad, in the bathtub." My father looked at me, he goes, "What?" I goes, "Yeah." So he called my friend up that does construction in the house, and he had got the whole bathroom, got rid of the tub, and turned it into a shower. And ever since then, from that point on, we haven't had any more occurrences in the bathroom.
We're talking to David Landry here on Speaking of Writers. His book is The Dead and the Bizarre Are Here and All Around Us. I noticed that you invited other guest writers to be in this book, David, and are they writing their own stories?
Yes. By the way, the reason why I had invited other writers to join me in my books is I felt like I wanted to share it. It would have been nice to, have somebody else add their stories, to the book and, get a little bit exposure and, give them that 15 minutes of fame. I believe in, sharing and helping people out. I'm a big fan for helping people. Doing that, where they call it pay forward. I'm one of those guys. And these writers, after they seen their story in the book, they all started thinking, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. And they've been dreaming of writing their own books, but never had the push for it until they seen their story. Once they seen their story, that was it. They started writing their own books on different subjects, and I'd probably say out of the 25 people in all my 4 books, I want to say about maybe 10 of them has started writing their own books and now are also getting published. So yeah, it snowballed, and they're happy where they're at.
And there is a video on YouTube for this book, right?
Yes. Each of the 4 books has its own video. So if you type in YouTube, The Dead and the Bizarre, you don't need to add all of it, but just The Dead and the Bizarre. Then you're going to see the 4 books right next to each other, and you just click each link. It'll take you to each book's video. They did a real great job in doing these videos, by the way.
So 4 books. Are you hard at work on the 5th?
The 5th book is called Abaddon Heart. It's a terror story. It's not nonfiction. It's fiction. But it starts right from the beginning of a police call, and it just goes right all the way to the end. That's 50% done. It's going to be a great movie to where nobody's going to want to get out of their seat and to go to the bathroom, because it's one of those movies where it's going to hold you there because you're going to be afraid to miss something. And the second book that I'm writing, just starting to put together, is going to be on near-death experiences.
And finally, David, what would you like readers to take away from this book?
When you read the books, it's going to be very, very simple. It's not going to be one of those type of books where, like some writers like to impress their readers that they got big language, college words and all that. These books are written very, very simple to where a 6 or 7-year-old child can pick up the book and read it and understand every single word. It's also made for translations, where people from another country, say in Mexico, they can pick it up and read it and not have to worry about getting a dictionary and trying to figure out what does this word mean. Like I said, it's very, very simple. I've talked to a lot of people that have already read my books, and they all come out and said, "No, we love it the way it is. It's not mind-boggling of trying to figure out what is he saying here." So no, it's very, very simple, and people, when they start reading it, they'll see what I'm talking about.
He is David Landry. The book is The Dead and the Bizarre Are Here and All Around Us. This book, you can get it at writersrepublic.com, writersrepublic.com, also Amazon and on barnesandnoble.com as well. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
And this is Speaking of Writers.